Welcome to another episode of Celluloid Citizens. I have my guest slash co-host Chris Burke with me. How you doing?
Doing well. How are you?
I'm good, can't complain. I just watched the film we're going to be covering, The Empty Man, for the second time today.
Hey, great. I did a rewatch last night.
Yeah, Empty Man is a 2020 film written and directed by David Pryor, starring, let me just open this up here, James Badgedale, Marin Ireland, I should have opened these already, Sasha Frolova.
They give good performances here. There's nobody here that I was really familiar with that I can recall. Although there is one guest spot that I appreciated that I actually did not recognize because the person in question is quite a chameleon. But we'll maybe leave that for a little bit later on.
Yeah, I was joking with my girlfriend on the first watch, this is the quintessential movie of I know that guy. Where do I know that guy from? Or I've seen that actress. What was she in? And it's the whole cast is that. Which I kind of like, actually. It sort of fits with the theme of, we'll get into it, but The Empty Man is all about the nature of reality and things like that.
Yeah, it definitely plays with viewer expectation and, the idea of what the viewer is bringing to the table and imposing on the story, or being, suggestively being, imposed upon the story by the viewer in some way. So there's a little bit of that going on. And we might even, you might even talk about that in a metafictional sense, but definitely at least within the story, there's a lot of shifting of narrative perspective in unsettling ways, let's say.
Yeah, I think my favorite thing about this film is that, as you said, you kind of don't know what to expect going in. I guess it's easier if we just start going chronologically. So we open the film in, I believe it's Bhutan.
Yeah, mountainous regions of Bhutan, I believe, is where that is. So
yeah, is that Tibet? Forgive my geographic.
It's its own country, but it borders on, I believe, Nepal and possibly a part of China, at least. I'm not sure about Tibet, but yeah, it's in that general Southern Asian vicinity. I think maybe it borders on India too.
All right, that's what I figured. So we open with these two couples that are backpacking, camping, and climbing this mountain in Bhutan. And one of them starts to hear this noise, and he kind of follows the noise and ends up falling into this crack between these two rocks. So one of the friends is like, oh shit, and he, gets a climbing rope and goes down. And this was one of my favorite scenes in the entire film. It's just a great way to open a horror film, but I just also I'm a real sucker when it comes to interesting looking skeletons. And this one was
interest.
This was definitely, because it's first of all, you notice scale wise, it looks like this thing was 10 feet tall or something.
Yeah, definitely an abnormal size, and there's extra stuff that's
and it looks like it could be, I don't know, tentacles, it could be wings. There's just these little extra things coming out.
Tubular structure things.
And the guy who fell in, forgive me, I don't actually remember the actor or the characters' names.
It's Greg and Paul, but I always mix up who's who.
But basically, the guy who fell in, he's sitting in a lotus position in front of this skeleton, which is also sort of sitting in a lotus position. And that's another thing I love about this film is I have a weird fascination with the niche horror that is taking Buddhism and making it creepy. Yeah, I don't know why, but it just it really hits the spot I did not know I needed in my life.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting, actually, backing up just a tiny bit before they actually even get up to the top where they're climbing. They have a very quick encounter that you don't really notice on a first watch because it's one of the very first things, but it's just this awkward gaze between a group of passing monks who are coming down from the mountain. They pass the four main characters in the opening, and they just exchange this really something's wrong kind of look. It's a look of warning or foreboding, and I didn't even notice it or remember it from the first watch.
Yeah, I will say I noticed it more on the second watch, because the first watch you just think, oh, they're just kind of geez, more American tourists, what the hell. But on the second watch, you maybe get the sense oh, maybe they're should we warn them? Or,
Yeah, but then there'd be the whole language barrier thing, and the fact that they're passing each other,
Right,
and
and
they're
yeah.
clearly en route away from somewhere else, and you know, it definitely just still has the impression of they haven't even gotten to the movie proper.
I mean, and it's the whole Buddhist thing too, to like let things be and like not interfere, I guess.
Yep. Or who knows? Maybe
Um,
maybe they have their own nefarious interests that are behind the scenes that we never find out about.
that's true. This is one of the more interesting aspects of the film is that, when I first saw this, I thought, okay, so this whole movie is going to be set in Bhutan, and it's going to be about this guy who's got this weird, like, mental illness kind of fugue state going on because he ran into the skeleton, and he finds this like flute. So I thought that would be the whole film.
Yeah, pretty.
Which is a normal assumption because most films, especially bigger budgeted films, that's how, we're introduced to the characters. Those are going to be your characters for the movie. Introduced to the setting. That's going to be your setting for the movie.
Yeah, pretty much every time.
And this film does not do that. Yeah.
Pretty much every time they you think you have an idea of where it's going to go, it does something to really change direction. And I thought that was one of the strengths of the movie, even though it's pulling on a lot of other influences. It keeps being unpredictable in a convincing way.
Yeah, there's almost I had this weird feeling watching it, like it's almost like a creepypasta anthology film, even though it's not an anthology film because it's like every segment is the same detective.
Yeah.
There are different settings, but it's still the same kind of. You realize at the end it's still more or less connected, but while you're watching it, you're not really sure, like, how is the camp connected? You've seen it in an article about the Pontifex Institute, but how specifically, and, stuff like that.
Yeah, they leave a lot of the connective details, like quick flashes on the screen of a Wikipedia article, and that'll tell you why they moved from one place to another. And like it feels kind of confusing for a while, but then when it kind of comes into its own, like you start to see more and more, and it just keeps expanding on itself in really interesting ways.
And I really appreciated that. Like it allows you as a view, like it sees you as a viewer as intelligent enough to piece everything together, which I always appreciate.
Yep, they gave just the right amount of.
Like it's not hammering home like we're going to the camp because it's connected to the Pontifex. And like there's one, and I missed this the first time. There's one quick flash of a picture of it when he's doing the wiki search.
Yep.
And like that's your only indication.
Yeah, and if you notice, like there's also mentions of the City Lights bookstore and connections to the was the guy Parsons from the NASA guy who was into the occult. I forget his first name, but there's connections there, and there's all kinds of like little details that fill in gaps between like the real world and the idea of the urban legend come alive thing that happens in the movie. And honestly, like the way it was marketed, I thought it was just going to be a teen slasher that's based around some urban legend, which I've seen 1,000 times. And
I think part of the issue was, the marketing. From what I've heard, I haven't watched the trailer, but from what I've heard from people, they were like, it just looked like it'd be the Bye Bye Man or something like that.
Yeah, I didn't even want to watch it.
Which is like, there's nothing wrong with that sort of film, but I could see why people were like, oh, I don't want to watch another one of those.
Yeah, I didn't even have it on my list because I was like, oh, this looks kind of dumb and something I've seen before. But then everybody started talking about it, and so I gave it a spin. And it's really, it does combine a whole bunch of different subgenres of horror, but the teen slasher element is actually probably the smallest out of all the clear influences on there. Like there's only really a couple of scenes that really clearly tie back to that kind of movie.
It's true. But anyway, so to tie up the very beginning real quick, they managed to get their friend. Oh, before this, he whispers to his friend, like, if you touch me, you'll die.
Yeah, and they're really...
This is very kind of creepy, like, he's like waiting, and he's like, maybe I shouldn't touch him. But then ultimately he does, because he's like, I got to get you out of here.
Yeah, there's not any way.
And they manage to find a cabin before like this huge storm rolls in. And for the first 15 minutes, it's just like they're arguing about what they're going to do with their friend. They're like miles away from any hospital, so that's not really a good idea. And even if they were going to try that, there's this like snowstorm where they'd probably freeze to death in like an hour.
Yeah, and we should probably add that like their friend, when they get him out of that little hole in the cave, like he can't talk or he's completely unfunctional. They have to really work to get him out of there, and the other guy in the party has to literally carry him to the abandoned cabin, and he's not speaking, but the only thing that he could say was that very faint "if you touch me you'll die" thing. And eventually,
yeah, and he sort of I don't remember if this is early on, but he starts doing these clicking noises.
Yeah, I love the Foley work there, and like how they have all these weird like mantras and subdued vocalizations that you can't make any sense of, but they gain meaning through the way that they're repeated, which is a theme of the movie in a major way.
Yeah, but again, like the whole taking like almost like Buddhist chanting and making it into like a horror film soundtrack is pretty great.
Absolutely.
But yeah, at some point, I believe it's his girlfriend, the man who's like in this fugue state. She just sort of loses it. She's like, everyone goes out to, or the other two go out to, I forget what they're even doing. I think they're looking if they can, I don't know.
Someone's trying to go back for help and get through the pass, either through the storm or after the storm has passed, but they have to turn back because they couldn't make it through like a bridge or something. They couldn't make it through somewhere because of a snowstorm. And while they're gone, the girlfriend of the guy who's been essentially rendered unconscious, she starts seeing and hearing things, and she has a strange encounter while the other two are gone to get help. She's out in the snow, and she sees this figure that she is asking for help, and then it doesn't say anything, and suddenly it starts to rush her, and like that's the first like visible real threat that we've really seen in the movie so far.
Yeah, and I would say of everything, I understand why they did stuff like this, because they were seemingly trying to market this as a regular horror film. And like, so that sort of stuff, when they have like this kind of tall skeletal figure in a robe that like rushes at people, that's like the most, I guess, typical horror film stuff they do.
Yeah.
Or it's some of it, at least. Like the jump scares type of thing.
Yeah, it does feel, at this point, it still feels somewhat familiar in terms of the kind of movie you might be expecting to see.
It's true. I mean, it's going, other than the setting being, not in America or Canada or anywhere all that familiar, it isn't doing anything that unique, but you get sort of glimpses, like with the skeleton, like, you're sort of like, well, that's weird and like borderline Geiger-esque. You like sort of think about like Alien and like the design of that.
Yeah, because it kind of looks like he's like strapped into the cave wall. Like there's definitely this idea of this structurally being melded into the landscape in some way.
Yeah, but so they eventually the other two of the party come back. Girlfriend's flipping out, like, I saw something. Did you see anything? They just think she's losing it, and they're like, no, we didn't see anything. We cut to her playing this flute. The flute's never really... They don't really go into detail about the flute. You get the sense it's sort of connected to this creature in some way.
Yeah, they leave that pretty vague.
Which I liked. You don't really need to spell it out. I think I wouldn't have liked it as much if they were like, this flute draws the creature. And I just pieced together that the reason they blow into an empty bottle on the bridge is probably the mimicking of that flute sound.
Yeah, it's to create the origin of what will later appear as an urban legend, because what's happening in the prologue is like 25 years before the main action that's going to come after like the 25-minute mark.
Right, that's true. I didn't actually specify. So this takes place in the past.
Yeah, sometime in the 90s. Mid-90s maybe?
Yeah, but like that's what I'm saying though. Like literally just now I pieced together, oh, that's why they're blowing into a bottle, because it's like the flute thing.
Yep, it's that kind of airy sound that's, meditative in a way, but then also used to invite certain other things.
Yeah, and like I guess I hesitate to make this reference, but I was thinking about the music of Eric Zahn, because, it's sort of getting into this, like, borderline weird fiction territory in terms of, like, there's this weird skeleton, and people are starting to just feel really weird, and there's this flute they keep playing, and...
Yeah, and the girlfriend keeps kind of like
Um,
giving weird looks and seeming to be, you know, there's rifts that develop or are magnified, during the first day or two that they're in that cabin, and from that weird encounter that she had that they weren't part of, and then those really start to blow up when they discover that the boyfriend has basically disappeared, and they go looking for him, and then they find him, and that's when the real fun starts.
yeah, I would say this scene in particular was when I was really like, oh shit. Like, this was when I was like, what am I even
Oh
in
yeah, that
for?
was such a good moment. The end of the prologue there. You want to share that?
Yeah, yeah. So they find the catatonic, more or less catatonic boyfriend sitting in the lowest position in front of this bridge that they went across. And I believe he's blowing into this flute.
Yep.
And the other guy finally snaps and he's like, "What's wrong with you? Like, why are you being such a prima donna? Like, we could die because you're having a bad day." Like, he's just being an angry, like, we've had to sit on this mountain now for 24 hours or however long, and we're getting hungry and we need to get out of here, but you're causing us not to be able to do that.
Yeah, there's some hints that the character who's in a catatonic state has like a history of mental illness or self harm or
Yeah, there
something
is
like that.
I forgot to mention, there is a scene earlier where they show his wrists and there are a bunch of cuts on them. So you get the sense that maybe he's a depressive, that he tried to commit suicide a couple times, or at the very least that he's a
Yeah,
cutter.
and that comes back later too, in the main body of the movie when they're explaining the urban legend and having a conversation about suicide. Actually,
Yeah, that's true. It does come into play.
and I honestly I didn't even catch that, the part that you mentioned there about his risk, because I must have missed that on the screen, and that's another piece of the puzzle that kind of ties together pretty well.
It's very quick, and they don't see. That's the thing about The Empty Man. It's not like most bigger budgeted films where they would intentionally have a very, like slow shot of the cuts on the wrist, and then they'd probably have an insert to show it to like magnify, like, you should know this. It's sort of like has these really quick things and like is confident enough in you as a viewer that you're going to piece it
Yeah.
together. So there's this really brief, I don't even remember who, but they lift up his wrist to check maybe his pulse, and there are these little like lines of scar tissue. But yeah, so anyway, he's sitting on the bridge and we're cutting back and forth and you're seeing the girlfriend's face, and eventually she just takes this knife out, stabs this guy in the back like a bunch of times, and then pushes him like off of this ledge into this like
Oh
ravine.
man, that was such a great, like, it's
And
happened
it's
so
very
fast.
effective because, like, the stabbing stuff, you're like, okay, I'm used to that. But, like, the kicking into the ravine is like, oh, it's just done really well. It's really
Yeah,
creepy.
I mean, it really feels like your stomach feels like it's gonna, turn over a little bit, like you're on a roller coaster because you're looking down from a height. Like that's how effective it is at just putting the viewer into that spot and how fast it all happens.
It is. And then it's like, in a quick succession, she slits the other woman's throat. And I forget if she pushes her
Yeah,
off or if this woman just sort of, I think she just, she's dying. So she, like,
I think she pushes
kind
her
of
off.
wanders and falls off. Yeah, something like that. And then there's this, very intense stare between who we will learn later is the original Empty Man, sitting there, and I believe a single tear falls down his cheek
Yeah,
because you get the sense he's still in there somewhere,
yeah,
but he's been sort of taken
yeah.
over.
The single tear was kind of like the visual equivalent of the very faint "if you touch me, you'll die" thing that he did before, where you can just kind of tell he's barely able to fight anything that's going on inside of him.
Yeah, but then there's this really great shot where the girlfriend just kind of walks backwards and intentionally just dives back first into this ravine.
Yeah, and it's also quiet. Like usually when you're seeing a movie and someone goes flying off a cliff, there's a scream or a Wilhelm scream. There's some kind of
Yeah, yeah.
expression, and like these are all just a chilling silence as you look down into this just about bottomless ravine or cliff, what drop off or whatever. But I thought that was like the highlight of the highlight of the movie for a long time stayed that particular moment in my mind. But then, it kind of takes some space to breathe and get going again. But the crazy comes back.
No, it's true, but like, just the shot in particular of the girlfriend, because she doesn't jump, she's just like straight, standing straight, like up and down,
Yeah.
and just sort of falls back like a trust fall almost. But so the angle is just from, it's like from the ledge, and you're not really looking in. So she just falls back and is just gone.
No big deal.
And it's just really creepy.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah.
And like, it's not the most original shot. I've definitely seen that in things, but it's still effective.
Definitely. It's still like all this happens in 20 seconds, maybe. Like it's so fast. And
yeah, that's the thing. It's like you got 10 or 15 minutes establishing these characters and, the peril they're in and the stakes. And so you assume, okay, this will be the rest of the movie. And this will be a thing the film does consistently. And then in less than a minute, they kill everyone off. And you're like, holy shit. But so we cut from this to Missouri. And this was the first time that I was like, wait, what? Cause it's like, okay, we're in the 90s in Bhutan and now we're in the now, or well, I said 2018, I think, in Missouri. And you're like, oh, okay. And we see this, we get this quick establishment of the type of character we're going to be following, who is jogging, and then they stop and light up a cigarette.
Interesting.
So that's a pretty clear indication of the type of man we're dealing with.
I think it's interesting that we're introduced to him while he's running, given kind of the way they set up the mythology around that occurrence in the prologue where some mysterious creature seems to rush forward to the girlfriend when we first get a sense of threat in the movie.
Well, you know what? The other thing is that I just pieced together. We're first introduced to him on a bridge.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And further, we're introduced to him on a bridge when he stops. So it's almost like a mirroring of that earlier scene where the man's in the lotus position in front of the bridge. Yep. Almost like a visual, and you wouldn't know this unless you've seen the film, but almost like a visual nod to this man will be like this other man.
Yeah, there's all kinds of stuff in there that subtly link the two that you really are not going to notice, until you have a better idea of what's going on. But yeah, that's what makes the movie so, in some ways just fun, but it's really just kind of solidly put together. There's nothing really that goes to waste.
No, it's true. So we follow this man. I'm blanking on his name. Let me see.
La Sombra. James La Sombra.
La Sombra?
Which, if I'm remembering my Spanish, is the shadow in Spanish.
Oh, all right. James La Sombra. I think it's sort of funny because I'm like, this dude does not look Latin.
I thought that.
Okay.
I understand.
I was like, he's very white for a La Sombra, but all right. And, we just get introduced to him. He works at a security store. And I just pieced this together too. There's a woman asking him about mace. Mm-hmm. And he's like, you don't want that mace because you got to shake it. You want this mace. And then later on in the film, of course, he maces someone.
Garrett. Ugh, who doesn't want to mace Garrett?
I know. He's terrible. But anyway. So we introduce this guy, and he's sort of a sad sack. He's like a chain smoker. He's got heavy bags under his eyes.
Clearly a man who has seen some shit.
Yeah. And, he sees a coupon for a free birthday meal at a Mexican restaurant in town. So he goes. There are a lot of oddly funny moments in this that I wasn't expecting.
Yeah, they nail the comic relief in just the right doses.
They do, because it's not so much that you can't take it seriously as a horror film, but it's just enough that it lets the air out, and then it's actually more startling when stuff happens again. But so he finishes his meal, and he gives the coupon for the birthday thing. I guess it is his birthday.
His
I wasn't
birthday.
sure if
everything has his.
It actually is his birthday. I wasn't sure whether he was doing that just to get a free meal or not.
You're clearly, I think, meant to think that he's kind of just pathetic in certain ways, and he probably does this somewhat often. He just goes to get a free birthday meal from places. That's kind of how I
Yeah, like alone too. We should add.
Alone.
So he. There's this great scene where they like come by with a little piece of flan with a candle in it, and they start saying "Happy Birthday," but they just go "Happy Birthday, customer," which kind of killed me. But anyway, so he's just sort of like, "Oh God," and we cut from that. He goes back to his house, and there's this teenage girl in his backyard, and they start talking. We get the sense that they have sort of a close relationship. Not like a skeevy one, but, like a...
Neighborly and platonic, but affectionate.
Neighborly, like borderline paternal kind of thing. And yeah, she talks about, like, I'm so glad you're here. We definitely needed you after my dad died and stuff like that.
So you really have no idea what she's talking about, though. Like, it sounds like a lot of...
Right, and she hints that, like, and also when you lost your, loved ones... So you get the sense he's lost loved ones and she has too, and they sort of bonded over that.
And she talks a little bit about the, what if all thought was coming from somewhere? She talks about the power of positive thinking and just, the idea of communicating your thoughts into reality in some way. So like it sounds like gibberish when she's talking about it, but it comes to take on heavier meaning.
It does, and I don't want to spoil it yet. I mean, full spoilers going ahead, obviously, but it is sort of funny in retrospect watching that, like, wow, you're such a jerk. But yeah, so, this is our introduction to this character, the teenage girl, who will be basically who James is looking for the majority of the film, which will take him to a variety of locales. But we cut to, the next door neighbor's house. And this mother character is, asking after the teenage girl, and she goes into her room and sees on the mirror written in blood, the empty man.
The empty man made me do it.
Or the empty man made me do it, or something. So yeah, this is sort of like our inciting incident that gets James to actually start researching and finding out about the Empty Man and the Pontifex Institute and all this other stuff.
Yep, and they make sure to mention that he's an ex-cop, and they keep hinting at something bad that he did at some point that got him kicked off the force. But in any case, they make sure to establish, by this point that he has investigative abilities, and that's probably why he's in the security business, because he's no longer a cop. And so he has these conversations with the police who are investigating her disappearance that kind of establishes some more of his background and like why exactly he's getting involved in any of this. And he's also got some implied history with the girl's mom, Nora, and that's kind of why he agrees to kind of take it on, because he doesn't think the cops are going to do anything since she's just turned 18. She's still in high school, but she's 18, so there's not much that the cops might be able to do.
I mean, to an extent, he's right, too, because he basically, off screen goes downstairs to talk to them, and they basically say, she's 18. Like, we're not going to look at this like a missing person until it's been a while and she hasn't contacted anyone. And we're back. So before the break, we had just gotten to the point where James's character had agreed to try to find where Amanda Quayle, the teenage character, went. And so at this point in the movie, on the first watch, I got a little nervous because I was like, oh God, are we going to have like a teen slasher? Not that there's anything wrong with those. It's just there are 1,000,001 of them.
Yeah, we don't.
So I was hoping, I hope this doesn't just become a thing about teenagers getting picked off one by one for the next hour.
That's exactly what I was worried about. But I think, first of all, the prologue and the killer finale there kind of put my mind at ease about, what kind of movie this was going to be. And I clearly already, we had already clearly had our expectations pretty well thwarted by the way that went. And so, it does start to feel like it dips a little bit back into teen slasher territory. And we've kind of built something like an urban legend or some of some sort, and then now we're focusing on a group of teenagers. This girl Amanda and her friend group who we soon find out they were all hanging out on a bridge together, and stuff happened, and now that's related to her disappearance. So Lasombra is going to talk to her friends. The only one he can seem to track down is her name is Devara, if I'm remembering right, and they have this.
I think so.
They have this very strained conversation in his car outside of the school, and
and he lets her like smoke a cigarette.
Yeah, and
which I would say is not kosher, but none of this movie is kosher.
Yeah,
so.
It's clearly painting him as a person who can be a little flexible in ethics, but at the same time, Amanda's 18, so maybe she's
right.
18.
I mean, she's an adult, and she'd probably be smoking anyway, so whatever. And he's trying to, it's for the greater good. He's trying to figure out where this missing girl is. This is admittedly my least favorite part of the film.
Yeah, the whole backstory thing, and it feels too familiar. Right there is when it starts to feel overly familiar, and you're like, okay, come on.
Right. This is when you're like, okay, it's going to be business as usual. It's going to be like, we heard about this legend. So, and it is what they go to a bridge, and it's like, we heard about this legend. So Amanda starts by picking up this bottle, and she explains, if you blow into this bottle on a bridge and think about the empty man, he'll be conjured into being. And so she kind of begrudgingly gets the rest of the teen group to agree to do it, and they all do it. One funny thing was, like, there's this one character with longer hair and a beanie, and I couldn't place where I knew him from, but I was like, I've seen this actor.
Yeah.
This will happen a lot in this film.
Yeah, that looked familiar to me too. Yeah.
He was in the new version of The Stand miniseries. He plays Harold Lauder.
Okay. Well, that wouldn't be where.
And it was hard for me to place him because he's playing like this sort of like creepy nerd character in The Stand. But then in this one, he's sort of like a cool stoner guy.
He made me think of, I think, James Duval from the Doom generation, or like Jimbo from The Simpsons. Or was it Jimbo? Which one of the Simpsons? Oh, whatever.
I think it's Jimbo, the one that's got the beanie and the longer hair, yeah.
But a bunch of teen doofuses recounting this urban legend about summoning the empty man, and they make sure to create the rules here pretty clearly, where they say, first the first day you hear him, the second day you see him, and on the third day he finds you, and that kind of tracks with the events that happen in the prologue. And it's
that's true, yeah. But I couldn't help but think this whole time, like, so a producer was definitely like, look, you need to have this moment where you explain it.
It definitely feels
because
like
it seems the most overt. Like, this is what happens. These are the rules. Like, this is who the empty man is.
But thankfully, it doesn't keep that. It doesn't make a habit of being that kind of on the. It keeps changing the expectations, and it's used in retrospect in an interesting way that's different from what you might be thinking.
It's true, yeah. So, he finds out, or James's character finds out about this. He's been recording the conversation, but, so he's, I forget exactly the secret. I mean, basically he's like, okay. And I believe Devara mentions the Pontifex Institute. I'm not entirely, no. After this, what he does is he finds the other friends in the group. He goes to their houses to try to talk to them.
Well, he has trouble finding them at that point. He can't find anybody.
And he has trouble finding, he can't find any of them.
But he actually walks into
someone's house. Actually, he does walk into someone's house when there's no one there. And he goes into the room, and this is when he finds a flyer for the Pontifex Institute, which is sort of our first hint of okay, this will probably be important.
Yeah.
And then eventually he goes to the bridge. He finds the bridge, and he walks on it, and there's this interesting effect with sound where it's typical kind of crickets and the wind swaying, and then at some point, once he's about the halfway point on the bridge, the sound just stops and there's the silence.
Yeah, the silence, and it reminds you of the murder scene in the prologue where they're going over the cliffside.
Yeah, I think this is an effective tool. I think I've seen some films do it before, but it's still, again, it's an effective tool. because it's just like you're used to, okay, this is the background sound, and so when it entirely cuts, you're like, uh-oh, something's gonna happen.
Yeah, and there's a couple other key moments that I think that's repeated, and it sort of creates some of the different like chapter breaks or the different twists and turns of the movie. Things start to change direction when those happen. It usually turns out.
No, it's true. At some point he starts to hear this noise, and I love, like, this is one of my favorite things about the movie. He starts to hear this noise, and so he goes, there's like a ladder that leads under the bridge. And the whole time on my first watch, I'm thinking there's going to be some kind of jump scare with the empty man, or,
yeah,
you might find one of them dead down there. But he goes down there, and the sound it's like, I think it's like 5 teenagers who have hung themselves at the bottom of this bridge, and their shoes are like knocking against the bridge.
Creaking. Yeah, it's like this creaking and tapping sound that reminds you a little bit of some of the strange vocalizations that you've heard previously in the cave in the opening. And I think also the ladder going down into that little subspace beneath the bridge is also meant to remind us of the descent they did down into that crevice in the mountains.
No, that's true, and I'm sort of ashamed of this. At this moment, I was like, yes! And then
that was great.
Afterwards, I'm like, oh, I shouldn't be applauding a bunch of dead teenagers. But
it's a shocking image. It was really effective.
It creeped me out. It was like, because, at first the way the camera's set up, you see the one teenager hanging, and you're like, oh shit. But then they sort of pan to the side, and you see that there are like 4 others hanging in a perfect line behind this one.
Yeah, it's basically almost everybody who was on that flashback scene on the bridge that the friend recounted when all the weird stuff started happening. So he turns out he doesn't find Amanda there, though.
No, he doesn't. But like, I love this moment because again, it subverts expectations. The last 10, 15 minutes, you're like, cool, it's going to be a thing about a boogeyman type, and there's going to be teenagers running away from it and getting killed one by one.
Not one by one.
And it is not that. It's very quickly like, no, they're all dead.
Fuck your expectations. They're all dead. And they killed those 3 characters real quick on the prologue too. So it's not that kind of movie where it's, one scene is a death and then you have a break and then another scene you have a death. We're looking at a mass effect here.
Yeah, and it is very, I've seen a lot of horror films, but like, it is still very startling, because especially when it's a group of teenagers, I think, because you're used to seeing adults get killed, and you're even used to seeing teenagers get killed, but usually it's one by one. And when it's like all of them that have just been established, you're like, oh crap, okay. And then we, at some point, cut to
Devara.
Devara's at some sort of spa.
Well, she's on the swim team. So she's mentioned before that she has to go to swim practice.
Yeah. She's on the swim team.
So she's in like a sauna, some kind.
Yeah, so she's in a sauna. This is another moment where it got very... It was effective, but it was very sort of typical teenage slasher. But she's in this sauna, and there's the smoke, or the steam, rather. And the steam it's almost mirroring the snowstorm from the prologue.
Oh, yeah. I didn't think about that. Great catch.
Yeah, it took me a little bit, because, the first time the first time you see this figure running, it's like through like kind of fog and snow. So yeah, this figure runs up with some scissors and starts stabbing Devara in the face. We cut, and you see she's actually doing it to herself, which is that's effective.
Yeah, as they say later, people just don't do that to themselves.
Right, and so she collapses, and there's a pool of blood, and she like sees this figure, and it shuts her eyes, and
it's kind of like a Grim Reaper sort of shadowy figure.
Yeah, it is very Grim Reaper-esque. It's like skeletal, and then it's got like the cowl and the black robe.
But it also kind of looks like that mysterious shape that was in the prologue that created the first like real sudden threat kind of moment.
Yeah, no, it's true. So you'll forgive me. I have trouble going like exactly from beat to beat. And I don't take notes. So, let's see. So at some point he's at the bridge and he's talking to the police, And he leaves. He goes back home.
But he blew on the bottle on the bridge. We should make sure to mention when he was checking out the bridge.
Oh, that's right. He does. He blows on the bottle on the bridge.
And it seems to be the one that they.
And I think that's what leads into the sound cutting.
Yeah. It seems
like he throws the bottle, and then it's just all of a sudden the sound is just cut.
Yeah, and it seems to be the same bottle that the teenagers used a couple nights before that kicked all this stuff off in the present day, which I thought was interesting that they made sure to take every single important image and repeat it in different contexts, and I think that their consistency with that is part of what makes it a solid movie.
Yeah, it's true. There's like mirroring. There's a lot of mirroring.
Yeah, but he starts having his own weird encounters in his home that seem to be juxtaposed with this memory of some tragic event that killed his wife in the past that's kind of looming over him and invading his dreams. So like he's back at his house and starts hearing a noise there. And it's very unsettling at that point because there's nobody else there with him.
There's no one else there with him. He gets creeped out. He slams his door, and one thing we forgot to mention is he does sort of have you get the sense he has this sort of very faint auditory hallucination.
Yeah, he's taking some kind of
sometimes something like that where it's like, "Where were you?" Someone's whispering it, and he will take some sort of pill that you assume is an antipsychotic,
mm-hmm.
or some kind of anti-anxiety, some form of psychotropic. And so, obviously this happens. He grabs the bat and he doesn't see anybody, but he's freaked out, so he takes the pill. And this ties back to the rules of the first night you hear him, the second night you see him, and the third night you feel him.
He finds you.
Or he finds you, rather. So we cut from here. Is it the next day that he goes to the Pontifex Institute?
Yeah, that's the main events of the next day is checking out the Pontifex Institute. But there's also some interplay with some more interplay with the neighbor, the mother of Amanda, and they do more to kind of flesh out this backstory. There's some event that happened between La Sombra and Amanda's mom that has kind of put some sort of wedge between them, and there's still sort of a strained friendship there, but there's also some difficult event that they keep seeming to dance around, but that'll come back into play.
It's true. But yeah, so the next day he goes to the Pontifex Institute. I keep saying this, so I'm trying to think of different words, but I do like this a lot. I was about to say this is my favorite, but you can't have three different favorites. But I do really, really like this scene a lot. He goes into, I assume, downtown Missouri, or something. I don't know.
Well, they're near St. Louis, I think. They don't really say that specifically that the Pontifex Institute.
I assumed it was something like St. Louis.
It's close enough, probably.
But so he goes to this old building where they have signs for the Pontifex Institute, and he goes in, and it's like this sort of new agey cult vibe, basically. There's pamphlets like Inner Peace, and
I love that question.
There's a woman at the front desk who's like, "Welcome, we're glad you came."
Definitely a creepy vibe, but I love the questionnaire that she asked him to fill out, and he's not having any of it, but it's there's all these sentences like a civilization's purpose is not fulfilled until it is destroyed, and it's just okay, now it's getting cosmic and very strange because a lot of this stuff sounds very bad and not the kind of thing that you would want to sign up for. So he's not really having any of that, but he's...
No, it's this bizarre psychological testing, it seems like, where it's if a woman is on her period, and it's just these terrible answers and stuff, and you're like, wait, what?
But they all turn out to have some kind of different significance than you might think at this stage. But at this point, it's just what on earth am I getting into?
But yeah, so, and there's a running gag that he has, but he goes up and he's like, "What is this?" And she's like, "It's a questionnaire." He's like, No, I know that. What is this? What is this place? And she's like, "Oh, well," and she's sort of evasive. And he's like, "Look, I grew up in San Francisco, so," and this just keeps coming back, in more hilarious ways.
It's both comic relief and becomes deadly serious in terms of the implications for the character.
Yeah, no, it's true. But so at some point, he's able to walk in and see a talk by, we assume, the leader of the Pontifex Institute.
He's got a very mega pastor kind of style to him.
He does, and I just really, I'm a real sucker for this sort of like cosmic nihilism, like Ligotti-esque, evil Buddhism kind of stuff. Because it takes like the calming stuff from Buddhism, like, you know, nothing matters and like we're all enough and you don't need anything. And sort of turns it on his head, like nothing matters. There is nothing. You are nothing. So it's sort of like the inverse of like the calming aspect of Buddhism. It's like, you know, if you are nothing, then maybe the universe is nothing.
Yeah, and that becomes more and more significant when he talks to the I don't even want to call him a preacher or pastor. He kind of looks more like a businessman sometimes, but he has a one-on-one conversation with him afterwards, and he's trying to just learn more about what the Pontifex people believe. And the speech ends on, or either their conversation or the speech ends on him using the phrase "the empty man," and then he starts talking about it more in terms of like Nietzsche, I believe, is the main quote that he refers to, and they start talking about abysses and getting all philosophical.
Yeah, but there's some interesting dialogue where he mentions like meaning, like, you know, meaning is robbed of its significance through repetition. So this quote from Nietzsche, when you look into the abyss stares back, this character mentions like it no longer means anything to us, you know, because we hear it all the time. And so suddenly it just kind of washes over us and it doesn't have the weight. But he's like, if you really think about that, like if you're staring into the abyss and the abyss stares back, is there something in you that the abyss is like drawn to?
Yeah, and that's they keep kind of inverting these like sort of religious ideas that we're probably all used to in some form or another, but then turning them on their head and making them horrifying, or turning them like so deeply personal that, you know, you're sort of being prompted to examine your inner nothingness. You know, he says something like the nothingness that unites everything, or it definitely sounds very Ligotti at that point. But it still also sounds fresh enough that it's still intriguing.
No, it's true. And this is, of course, the stapler guy from Office Space. I never remember the actor's actual name. Stephen Root, yes. But yeah, he's in the film very briefly. He never appears on screen again, but like he does a really great job of sort of like having the almost like the thesis statement of the movie. And like he's the one that tells you like this is like what the empty man is about. Sort of, like philosophically at least.
Yeah, he's sort of filling in with it's almost like a Bob Ross painting. Okay, we've got the imagery establishing the empty man. Now let's talk about the text and the ideas behind it. And I think that forms
basically. And yeah, I mean and you sort of get the sense like why people would be interested in this sort of a cult, because it is, new agey and relaxing, but it's also like there's definitely something more to it. James kind of sneaks away and goes to the basement to see if he can figure out anything, because he starts to think that maybe Amanda is at the Pontifex Institute, or that she's been to the Pontifex Institute.
Yeah, and he asks this guy Garrett.
There's this weird guy Garrett who talks like an old beat poet or whatever.
Neil Cassidy,
yep. And yeah, he goes in the basement, he sees these people kind of like in a group, but they quickly kick him out, and that's when he runs into, Neil Cassidy, who's like, she was here, but they took her.
I think they sent her downstate is how he puts it. And, he's kind of peppering in all these weird 50s daddy-o phrases while also talking about this dangerous cult that is very far reaching in a way that, this part of the story starts to remind me a lot of True Detective Season 1, and I feel like that's probably a pretty
I was going to say, it got very True Detective Season 1, where it's like they don't have a 5-year plan, they got a 500-year plan, daddy-ho kind of thing. Yeah, I think it's just maybe it's like the archaic speech and somebody like smoking in a jean jacket in the rain kind of a thing.
Yeah, it's the combination of the...
I think it's also the way that they overlaid the dialogue while he's driving.
Yeah, I like how they sort of make his speech both weirdly cosmic and serious and also absurdly folksy in a way that just is very jarring but effective. And I think even that, goes back to the confrontation in True Detective season 1 with the meth guy. And, so that was a really interesting reference there. And I think it comes back later on too.
It does. And so the next place we go to, if there's one moment where I was like, my belief had a little trouble, was like, he drives to this camp. But I forget what state it's supposed to be in. It might not be that far away.
He's in Missouri, and they just say it's downstate, so you don't really know how far away it is. It could be like a half hour. It could be 2 hours.
Yeah, that's true. Give me 1 second. I'm going to let my cat in. Come on. Okay, be quiet. All right. Then don't step on the computer, please, Kitty. All right. But yes, so anyway, he goes to this camp, and it's very... Yeah, one of the things I like about this film is like, it's almost like a mosaic film, in a way. Because it's like he's, there are various sort of themes, and like, it almost like hits different subsets of horror films, like in terms of tone.
Absolutely.
So it's like the beginning is sort of your survival one. The second part is more of a teenage slasher sort of thing, or supernatural thing. The third is like a new age cult horror. This one is like the abandoned creepy camp horror.
Yeah, and I mean there's J horror sprinkled in there too, in the way that they set it up on like a day 1, day 2, day 3 kind of timer, and even like the captioning of that timeline on the screen reminded me a lot of stuff like Ringu, and there's probably some other J horror elements that I haven't caught, but that felt...
Yeah, definitely the rules of the days seemed a lot like Ringu. So he goes to this camp. I don't remember if he trespasses or not. I think it might just be open. It seems abandoned. He goes into one of the cabins, finds a file cabinet,
and a teddy bear.
And a teddy bear, yeah. But he sees like, VHS tapes, and there is sort of a funny moment where he sees the names of, I believe it's all the teenagers. And he grabs those files, and then he sees one of his own name, and it's just this red file with nothing in it.
Yeah, that's a oh shit moment.
And he sort of says out loud, like, very funny.
Yeah, but something's different.
But he starts watching this VHS tape, and it's like these, people kind of in a circle, and they're like sort of chanting, and then this thing appears in the frame, and sort of like this weird... They've been talking about tulpas a lot, so you get the sense that maybe this is a tulpa they created.
Yeah, I think we saw the word tulpa in Amanda's diary that he was looking through, or one of her belongings. He saw the word tulpa at some point.
Right, and it's written on the back of the flyer for the Pontifex Institute.
That's
it. But yeah, so he grabs these files, and he starts watching this tape about this weird, I guess, tulpa that's created.
It's humanoid.
And then...
I was going to say, it's humanoid, but there's clearly a lot wrong with the being in question, and it's very unclear what the heck it is.
No, it's true. And, they kind of cut to this teddy bear behind him that's sort of moving, which is like, that got very creepypasta too, where it's like the teddy bear that came to life at the camp.
Yeah, starring Paddington.
Yes, but anyway, so you kind of get the sense he might have been in a fugue state, because like he goes into the cabin when it's daytime and he leaves and it's basically night.
Yeah, he's been there for a long time.
And he's been there a long time, which is sort of weird because it didn't seem like the tape was that long.
Yeah, it's like 30 seconds for the viewer in the real world.
Right. But so he leaves. I'm just going to stop saying this is a great scene and I love this scene, because just assume that the rest of these will have a lot
There's
of
a lot of good ones.
But he goes out and there's these people chanting and sort of running around this fire. And as he's watching, the flames sort of rise and like spiral into the night sky, which was a very arresting image. Again, that sort of seems like True Detective Season 1 sort of imagery.
Definitely.
It's definitely something that I missed from the later seasons of True Detective. But yeah, so there's that. He kind of, blinks, and then the fire's back to normal, and the people are sort of like, they're still running, but not as fast. He goes to leave, and all of a sudden the fire just like goes out, and it's completely dark, and he looks, and he starts hearing these like steps going forward.
Before they do that,
and he sees this huge group of people kind of moving in unison, stepping towards him, and they stop, and he steps backwards, and they take a step forward. And it's a pretty funny moment. He's like, yeah, no, and he just runs away.
It's both very funny and very unsettling. Like the way they play out, they just make you sit there and be unsettled with him while he's trying to figure out what the heck is going on. And the way that they're just staring at him as a group silently is definitely one of the top moments of the movie.
And I mean, one of the great things is they never explain that either. I've seen this movie twice now. I don't really know why that's happening.
Yeah, I think it's just supposed to be a bunch of the low-level cult members doing some kind of worship, and then I think they think he's just a random threat, maybe, because, well, information that comes up later kind of complicates that, because, it's very unclear what exactly they're all about.
It's true, but so, it's almost like a zombie movie moment where he's just, like, hauling ass away from this huge horde of people running at him, and he hops into his car, and people are like slamming on the windshield, and he drives off. I forgot to mention there's a very cool kind of intercut where he's staring at a map, and there's like this road on the map, and it sort of zooms in on the map, and then the map transitions into the actual landscape from above.
Yeah, it's a cool transition.
With the car, which is a pretty cool transition. But yeah, so he hauls ass out of there. I haven't really mentioned this, but he keeps kind of he keeps going to the police station and talking with this one detective. And this moment is fairly, this scene's fairly interesting because he's like, look at all this information I got. And the detective is like, did you break in? He's like, well, no. And he's like, I'm trying to figure out if you fucked up my case because you're not a cop. And you seemingly broke into a camp and stole information.
Yeah, so there's definitely some conflict there about where their priorities are, and then he's trying to plead with them like, "Hey, I'm checking out this. You got to take a look at this Pontifex place," and they're like, "We're already looking at it." So you're just kind of reminded that he's not a cop and out of his element.
Yeah, and what's interesting is I haven't read enough of this is based on a comic. I haven't read enough of it to know exactly how different it is, but I know that it seems like the main characters in the comic are. I assumed it was a person of color, like a detective, and then this Latin woman detective. And so I'm wondering if when they were making the film, they didn't change the Latin female detective to, James Shadow Man.
Oh, okay. That makes sense.
But the detective, the black detective he keeps talking to, it seems like that's a direct nod to the comic because that's about the age that like the character in the comic seems like. Again, I didn't really, I was more like kind of skimming it to see similarities and differences. It's very different from what I gathered. It's more of in the comic, it's more of like a generalized madness plague type of thing. And people are just acting crazy and there's like monsters all over.
Okay. They kind of allude to that in a couple of spots where, 3 weeks ago, a mother fed her baby to a microwave. Well, I don't know. It's some horrible kind of murder.
Or fed her baby to a bunch of dogs.
Yeah, okay, dogs. Well, yeah, so. So
I can confirm that it did interest. I think it's interesting when films take a source material and sort of take the vibe from it, but don't take the explicit characters or plot points. And it seems like this is what The Empty Man did in terms of the adaptation for the film.
Oh, that's cool. Like, I think, yeah, I mean, with something like The Empty Man, with the themes that it has of the communication and so forth, and the way it uses video, I think you kind of have to do some different things. I'm not familiar with the comic, but that sounds like maybe a reason that they might do
Well,
that.
I think the fun thing about adaptations like this, though, is like, since it's not a one-to-one, and not like this would stop, someone from still being like, I like the movie, I'll still read the comic even if it is the same plot. Since it is so different, it's like, now I want to read the comic and like enjoy it for what it is, and then also I enjoy the film for what it is, and they're connected, but they're different. Like, I don't want to speak out of turn, but it almost seems like this might be like a prologue of sorts to what happens in the comic, but I haven't read enough to know specifically.
Interesting. I'll have to check that out. I think I definitely like the movie enough to find it worthwhile, but I'm going to check that out sometime. I think also the way that the cop is talking with La Sombra, it really fills in some of the cosmic horror elements. Because when they're talking, he mentions, this is a kind of case you can't solve, and you can't indict the cosmos, which I thought was a great way of putting it, which is, it's not the most unique line I've ever heard, but it sums it up.
No, but it's a great line, because it's like, it goes into like, yeah, you can put the mother who put her baby, fed her baby to like stray dogs. You can put her in jail, but that's not solving it. That's punishing, but that's not answering why would this woman do this.
Yeah.
And yeah, you can't indict the cosmos.
Yeah, which you kind of need that bit of dialogue to sort of counterbalance the cosmic weirdness that he's just observed from the Pontifex Institute. So now you've got a full-on dialogue between the good guys and the bad guys. I mean, I don't like to use those words, but I thought that was a really interesting point in the movie and a good conversation.
Yeah, like, this is my favorite kind of weird fiction-esque type stuff where it's not like overtly Lovecraftian, but like it's got that flavor, it's got that vibe, it's got that like kind of Ligotti, this vague Ligotti-esque, like, the world is a cold place and the cosmos doesn't care about us.
Or maybe actively malevolent toward us.
Or actively malevolent, yeah. So let's see. I'm pretty sure we cut to James in his house, and this time it's another, having like a nightmare about this event that happened to his wife and child. He wakes up and kind of looks outside, and I think he sees an outline of something. I don't remember.
Yeah, there's a shadowy figure on the floor in the hallway outside his room.
Yeah, so he goes to check, and I believe he sees the teddy bear that's just sitting on the front steps. Unless this was later.
Well, I think I might have the order a little bit off, but I think he first has the second day you see him encounter, there's some shadowy figure out in the hallway outside of his bedroom, from the same general direction that he heard the sounds the night before. And that shadowy figure like rushes him, or no, it doesn't rush him. It kind of sneaks up to the door, and he's kind of crouched behind the door, looking under the crack, with the floor. And he sees like a footstep or a shadow of a footstep. And he's also we've also established that he has a bat in the room because, well, it's not clear what his response is going to be, but he basically just hides behind the door. But he clearly sees something under the crack in the door.
He does. And at some point he finds the teddy bear that was at the camp.
I think it's when he follows
his front step.
Yeah, I think it's when he's following out to just investigate what that was. I think he goes out to the door and finds the teddy bear on the porch is what happens.
Yeah, so this is the end of day 2. And we lead into day 3. God, what does he end up doing on day 3? I think he goes back to the Pontifex Institute, or somewhere around there, and he finds the beat poet guy.
Yeah, he's pissed off and really spooked now. So he basically abducts the Neil Cassidy guy, Garrett, and just stuffs him into his car. Because
I mean, I would also like to add, he stopped taking his medication. They make a point to show that. So you start to wonder, like, is he actively losing his mind? Which will come into play. But yeah, he maces the Neil Cassidy character, abducts him. There's a pretty funny cutaway where he looks around to see if anyone's seen, and everyone's just on their phones and doesn't even look up.
See, that was another just like 2 seconds of comic relief that went a long way.
It did, but so he, drives to an abandoned area, takes this kid out, puts a gun to his head, and is like, "What's happening? Like, where is she?" And you get more interesting kind of cosmic horror, weird dialogue where it's like, the empty man is coming and it's going to be a bloodbath. He's like pure black chaos.
There's minds that exist that are in this. There's talk about a shared dream space. Like dreams are not actually dreams; they're actually a real reality that you're connected to. And there's other minds there, and it's kind of implied that those are the minds that are communicating through the empty man at this point.
Yeah. So he gets mad and like. The Neil Cassidy character is like, you've already started hearing him in your head or seeing him, haven't you? Like, he's already infected you.
You got that itch.
Gets mad and starts punching this, the itch in your brain. He starts punching this kid in the face, and he just starts laughing. It's very Joker-esque. It's like his face is full of blood, and he's just howling with laughter.
Yeah. Well, this is another area that reminded me of that True Detective Season 1. It reminded me a lot of the confrontation in the woods right when Woody Harrelson finds the dead kids and then shoots the meth guy or whatever his name. I forget. Reggie, was it?
I think it was Reggie.
That seemed like a direct reference to that.
Reginald Ledoux, yeah. But yeah, so things are sort of winding down in the film at this point. And it seems like reality is sort of breaking for James.
Yeah, he's increasingly desperate, definitely. And he seems to have much less of a foothold on everything than he ever has before.
Yeah, I think we forgot to mention that at some point he goes to this hospital and sees that there's a man there that's basically non-responsive but hooked up to machines, so he's kept alive.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a little bit before he confronted Garrett, I think. Because he followed Garrett and some other people to the hospital.
Yeah, but so it's implied, though, that this is actually the character from the very beginning of the film, who has been kept alive by machines because he is now the empty man, and he's the vessel for this kind of ancient, unknowable force.
Yeah, and when he's in the hospital and looking at that comatose character from the prologue for the first time, the way that they show the patient in bed up against the wall and tubes coming in and out of him is definitely reminiscent of the weird skeletal guy at the beginning that had bone structures or something coming in and out of him and going into the wall. So they kind of
That's true, yeah. There's like a mirroring of that. But so he ends up going back to the hospital, and it's, raining and it's night, and he asks this. He's looking very unhinged at this point, by the way. And he's just like, "I'm a detective. Can you tell me about that guy?" And she's like, "Well, no, I'm not supposed to." And he's like, "Well, can you tell me how long he's been here?" And she's like, "It's been a while."
It's a very tense conversation it's very sparse and slowly measured in a way that I thought was a really great counterpoint to the fact that we've just been running around a lot and there's been a lot of tension and suspense building up, but now you're forced to go really slow because he's found out a lot. He's found more folders with his name and information in than we should add there because he goes back to the Pontifex Institute and looks through their archives and finds information about himself. Again, kind of similar to the fact that he found the red folder on himself at their other site. So I think that has happened before this point that we should make sure to include.
It's true, yeah. But so he goes back to he's back at the hospital. I believe this is when he runs into Amanda for the second time.
Yeah, he's talking to the duty nurse. It seems to be like deserted and kind of an overnight shift. It's very empty for a bit, and they're having this strained conversation, and it ends on this fantastically chilling note where he asks, you mind if I go in, or you mind if I have a look? And she's like, sure. In fact, one of his visitors is in there now because she's mentioned that this man gets a lot of visitors, and
Yeah, and there is a scene earlier where people are just basically like bowing to him.
Yeah, it's very odd. They're like dropping to their knees around his hospital bed, which is both funny and creepy.
So he goes in. Yeah, so there's a lot of that in this film. So he goes in and Amanda is there, and this is when we get our big reveal. Still don't know how I feel about this reveal, but the reveal is that James is actually not real. He's a tulpa that was created by Amanda and other people from the Pontifex Institute.
Yeah. So she gives a little bit of an info dump, and that was it was kind of stretching it, I think, in the amount of time they allowed that to unwind during, because she gives him like a ton of information about the fact that, this man here in the hospital bed's dying, but he's our only channel to this cosmic realm and these entities that are trying to communicate to us, because they keep repeating the mantra, you transmit, we receive. So they're clearly putting themselves in a subservient position to whatever cosmic force is trying to, invade our minds or whatever.
It's true. But so
they need a replacement for the dying guy because he can't withstand.
They need a replacement, and she explains that they needed someone who had sorrow and grief because it's easier for the empty man to get in that way.
Yep.
Which I think is delightfully cruel, because it's like, so not only did you just tell this man he's not real, you invented him from your mind. You also gave him a trauma background,
insult,
auditory hallucinations. You made him addicted to smoking and drinking. You made him have to take pills.
And he had an affair with a neighbor that caused
right,
him to
he
not
had
be
an affair
present
with
for
his neighbor
wife.
while his wife was dying.
Yeah, in a car crash that has haunted him to this day.
In a car crash, yeah. So it's maybe not the nicest.
It's a rough thing to inhabit.
It's a rough, yeah. The only thing I have an issue with in terms of the Tulpa stuff is it raises so many questions. Like, does that mean, I don't know, like, was he born when he was jogging on the bridge? Or?
That's what I took away from it, because that lines up with the way they first, on the first day, whatever, and they show the bridge being sort of the instigating factor. So I assume that he was born on that bridge.
Yeah, and it is kind of mirroring the bridge that you see the guy on in the prologue. So that does make sense. But there are questions I have with the Tulpa thing where it's like, does that mean he was at the funeral of Amanda's dad? Because they show him there, but I couldn't tell if that was just his implanted memory.
Yeah, she wrote that.
Or if that was actually her POV.
Yeah, she talks about how she wrote that, and she wrote him. And so, like, when he was at the Pontifex Institute and found a bunch of newspaper clippings relating directly to his personal experience, he's like, how the fuck do they have this? And then she later says that basically I wrote that, and these are clearly materials that have been put together to build a story. And so everything that he remembers from before he came into being on the bridge, I think she wrote into his existence.
That was what I thought was implied, yeah. So he understandably, freaks out,
Not a fan of that.
Runs out of the hospital. He goes home.
But it's not home.
Or no, before that he actually tries to call Nora, Amanda's mom, and she's just like, who is this? So that's pretty creepy.
Yeah, that served as the instigation for Amanda to explain that none of this was actually what he thought it was, and that's where the reality break was occurring. And so he, the other thing he saw at the Pontifex Institute, in a previous scene was, this mysterious picture of a chair in a dirty tunnel, and it was in his file, but you don't know what it means yet. And at this point,
right, and it took me a second watch to realize this, but the corridors and stuff that he walks in pretty soon, that he gets like transported to, I think those are in the basement of the Pontifex Institute.
Yeah, that's what I gathered, because they have that brief section where like his experience now bleeds over to the reality of a previous scene, and they sort of show two copies of himself, but like consciously not interacting with the other, and that's kind of hard to explain, but it works really well to kind of tie everything into a knot that you can better decipher, but still not fully understand. It was very J-horror.
Right. So he goes back to his house, and he sees that his bedroom door, there's this like eerie glow coming from it, this light, and he goes towards it, and he's sort of flashing in his mind of when his wife and child they end up dying on a bridge, which I think is
perfectly done. Yes, they could do a swan dive off a bridge, because I don't remember why she loses control for some reason of the car, but there's a deer.
Oh,
that's right. She swerves to avoid a deer.
So she swerves to avoid a deer. And and it's sort of intercutting with him having sex with the neighbor while this is happening. And eventually he gets to his bedroom door and opens it up, and he's back in the hospital room, which I thought was effective.
Doesn't he stop one of the tunnels first? 'Cause I thought he went through the tunnels before that.
He does. Actually, before this, he runs into that weird cloaked figure that sort of barfs black sludge into his body.
Yeah, that was a very X-Files kind of deal, I felt.
It was, yeah. But yeah, so then anyway, he walks in this room, he sees the empty man, and he proceeds to just like shoot the hell out of him. Like he blows his head off, and he shoots him, I think, twice in the head. In the chest a bunch of times. He empties the whole magazine.
Empty man versus empty magazine.
And you see, actually, the old empty man, there's like this spray of blood coming out of his head, and it sort of mirrors, like, in the look of it, I think the skeleton from the beginning of the film.
Yeah, no, it was definitely reminiscent of that, and also of like a halo on the wall behind him. But yeah, that was a great image that they ended.
It really was. It's really cool. And then he turns around, and this is sort of when you get the sense that like reality is just done, because like the hospital staff, instead of running to the patient or anything, they just stand and stare at him, and you sort of hear this like the chanting again. And everybody bows down, starts like worshiping him basically. And you start to hear like, whispered, like, you transmit, we receive, you transmit, we receive.
Yep. It felt very hereditary at the conclusion there. I was reminded of, but that's the only place you have to go at that point. And I felt like it wasn't necessarily the greatest ending, but I feel like it was the best one that they could give it, and that it worked well enough for me.
Yeah, I think the problem with this sort of film is like there's no good way to end it, because it's like it again, going back to X-Files. It's that thing where it's like when your whole film or show is based on intrigue and trying to explain something, but you don't want to explain it outright. It's like there's no real good way to end it.
Yeah, but it feels like a bit of a twist that you could see coming, at least for a couple scenes maybe, but it doesn't feel like you're not being cheated. Like I know some people enjoy high tension, but that was a movie that a lot of people just kind of feel cheated by the twist. And this isn't really that kind of situation. So I felt like it was.
No, because the difference is I was able to go back and watch The Empty Man again and have it like inform the film, but not spoil it.
Exactly.
It's sort of like I think about a lot of M. Night Shyamalan movies. It's like once you've seen them once and you know the twist, you go back and you're like, this isn't really as interesting.
Exactly.
But this was like, this actually, I think, added to the intrigue, because you start having all these interesting questions like why even bother with having him like go through this 3 days of like looking for this girl who's not missing?
Yeah, you better understand that this is a created being that has to be subjected to grief, sorrow, and fear.
I guess that's it. Yeah, they just wanted to make him suffer more so he'd be more receptive.
It's the Legati born to fear kind of dread.
Yeah, it's true. But, again, that's the film. And I really, obviously I've said this already. I really like this film. I think the consensus for most people is that it's just a pleasant surprise, that they went in thinking it'd just be like the Bye-Bye Man or whatever. And then they're like, wow, this is like actually an interesting film.
Yeah, there's a lot there. And, it never feels like pastiche or like it's just all this smug referential stuff saying, hey, look at all this genre stuff that I can recognize and put in my movie. It balances it all very well.
It reminded me a bit of the show Channel Zero.
Okay, I haven't seen that one.
Well, Channel Zero is like overtly creepypasta. Like they did. The first season was Candle Cove, and the second season is No End House. So like they actively went to existing creepypastas. But like in terms of tone, it does something about the film, gives it a very creepypasta vibe. I think the Tulpa thing helps.
Mm-hmm. Well,
and admittedly, I think Tulpas are something that if you're, immersed in internet horror culture, like you've heard about Tulpas. But for some reason in mainstream film and television, it hasn't really come into play yet that much.
Yeah, the only thing that I thought of was that X-Files episode in the suburbs with the trash monster guy. But other than that, yeah, I mean, maybe I think there's a little bit of Twin Peaks that mentions Tulpas. I haven't seen that season yet.
Yeah. But I thought this was just a really interesting film that kind of combined like horror and weird and, creepypasta and mainstream horror and sort of like hit all these notes while still being its own kind of song type of a thing.
Yeah, it's a great juggling act that they managed to pull off that many movies would not pull off.
Yeah, because I was thinking about it. I'm like, I feel like in the hands of a lesser writer-director, I mean, let's be honest, there's American Horror Story, which is sort of does this. Sort of does like, it picks a trope, it picks a type of horror, and does that. And I'm not always a fan. I think it can get kind of trite really easily.
Absolutely.
But this film manages to have just enough of everything that it sort of rewards you for being a longtime horror fan while also giving you something new.
Absolutely. Yeah, and the second watch, I thought, added plenty to the story, because now that you have the right framework to watch everything else, you realize better how it all ties together, and you realize how it's really a tight movie. It's a 2 hour, 15-minute movie that feels like a 90-minute movie because it doesn't feel boring. It doesn't drag.
No, there's nothing that's like extraneous. There's no scenes where you're like, they just added this to pad the runtime. Like everything connects and is important.
Yeah. Yeah, so I would definitely highly recommend it. I was very pleasantly surprised.
Same, yeah. I look forward to seeing, I'm sure once, what I predict is basically Empty Man, which is already getting a little bit of buzz, is going to get more buzz as the months go on. Eventually a streaming service is going to be smart enough to pick it up. People are going to see it en masse. People are going to talk about it a lot. There's going to be a lot of think pieces. I think one of the greatest things about this film is it actually does make you think. Whether you like it or not, there's no denying that it's you think afterwards. You're like, wait, well, what does this mean? Or what is this about? Or why was this here? And so I can see him maybe getting, offers to make more films because of I had not heard I didn't even see the trailer for this. I had not heard anything about this. And there was some film site that had an article about it. Basically, this thing survived studio hell and, COVID, because it came out last October, which obviously no one was seeing stuff in the theater then, so.
Yeah, I don't even remember how I first heard of it, because I remember watching the trailer and thinking it looked kind of unremarkable. But I must have heard some praise of it at some point around the same time, because otherwise I probably wouldn't have watched it, to be honest. But I heard a lot of people talking about it.
No, it's true. Like if you had just showed me the cover and been like, it's a good movie, and that was it, I'd be like, yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I want to see it. But just seeing, not only this article, but I was seeing, tweets and stuff, and oh, man, you got to see the Empty... And I went on Reddit, I think, and there were a bunch of good, positive people discussing how much they liked the film. So yeah, it's a great film. I'm excited for it to hit streaming services eventually. If it does, that's sort of tricky because part of the issue was that this was put out by Fox, which got bought at Disney around the time it was put out. So you're sort of in this weird where would it go streaming wise? Because Disney, we're sort of in this weird growing period with Disney as a streaming service where they own Fox now. But it's so what do they do with it though? What do they do with the Alien films? Are they going to put those eventually onto Disney Plus? Because I feel like they wouldn't want to do that.
Yeah, they're going to put them in the vault and lock them away for a decade or two.
Yeah, who knows? I mean, I could see them coming out with their own Fox streaming service.
Yep.
And maybe I've heard interesting things, they're going to have Noah Hawley, who did all the Fargo seasons, is working on an Alien TV show.
Okay.
Yeah, so who knows? But in any case, I'm sure David Pryor is going to have a good career after this. I'm excited to see what he does. And I think that's going to wrap it up for us. We're getting almost to the 2-hour mark, I think, on the episode.
How about that runtime? All right. Well, great movie, and good discussion.
Yeah, and, obviously come back anytime. And we're on Twitter at Celluloid Sits, and our main hub is on Anchor, and we are also on YouTube. So thanks for listening. We got a lot more movies in store, and have a good one.